this is, I think, going to be really important as we move forward in the discussion about trying to give some specificity to what these things are that people can get their hands around and really, see what we're talking about. So in the planning process, this kind of identifies the process around the year where we talk about our asset management plan. We're doing, and then identify what those needs are. And then, of course, we're going through the process right now of actually putting those into action. So I think this is going to be the first time that we're going to see the value of this, right? Because we have some revenue that's going to allow us to program some of the unfunded needs that are even over and above what is just the asset management unfunded need. So I think this kind of shows what this process would look like. We want to, make that a part of our yearly process. In fact, this year we took it to the commission just like we take the STIP to the commission, not necessarily for approval, but for the process to say these are what we've gone through, here's what came out in the STIP process, and then we want to refill those tiers as we go forward, so we keep that as kind of a living, up-to-date document. And it'll definitely mesh with our long-range plans, with your long-range plans. We want to make sure that those things go together and work together as we go forward. So this is the famous bucket chart, right? As we tried to talk about in our Citizens Guide, where we're trying to explain to the citizens in the state of Missouri what unfunded needs are, this was the first swing at that, right? And we try to put those into these categories where we talk about improving condition, economic development projects, safety projects, and to try to put some kind of, not like totally unrestrained unfunded need, but kind of a restrained need that's kind of come out of all the work that you all have done and that we've done through our long-range planning efforts and through some of our other efforts to kind of get a handle on what that is. Because one of the questions that we get asked a lot of times when we're having the discussion about funding is, well, how much do you need? It happened this morning in the budget committee. The third question out of one of the legislators' mouth was, well, we were talking about kind of what the size of the program is and what we're doing and what the asset management need is and what the condition of our system is. And one of the legislators asked the question, well, what is unfunded? And he said, what kind of number are we talking about? That's the first question that comes up. And so this was kind of the first attempt to kind of quantify what that is and to give a little specificity to where it is, right? And you can argue with the numbers and you can say maybe those are not quite right, but at least in what I would call a practical sense, I think this shows kind of what that is. As we've kind of talked about the Citizens Guide and we've used that in communities, and we've had about 3 years now of using that as kind of the cornerstone of talking to citizens about transportation, I think one of the things that we found is this is not specific enough for people that are average citizens to grab a hold of. They say, well, what does that mean? What does improved bridge conditions mean, and what does that mean to me? Well, we can talk about it because we know we have 900 bad bridges, and we know how many are coming, and we know that we built how many in any given year, but that's not really good enough for public consumption. When we talk about what are those major investments in safety and economic development, what is that? What does that mean? Well, in each one of your regions, you guys know what that means. It's new interchanges to serve areas of growth. It's whatever is those priorities in your region. Multimodal is another one, that really people can't quite grab a hold of what is that and what does it mean. So this was a great first step in trying to take this and turn it into something that is reasonable that we can talk about. And I think the most important part of this is that we tried to make it something that was achievable. You know, $8 billion is pretty big and it's pretty hard to grab a hold of. So we said, what is the reasonable tier that we can come up with? And quite frankly, we used as kind of the direction to you all to start with was the tier 1 was what was going to come out of the governor's bridge plan. We figured that's really achievable because at the time we asked to do this, you know, it was rattling around in the legislature and we were talking about $350 million. So we knew that tier 1 was achievable, maybe not a done deal when we asked about it, but now that is an achievable thing. So I think we asked for $350 million of road and bridge projects, and we said we're not going to constrain that too much, and we ended up getting about, 600 in tier 1. So we said, you know what, that's pretty reasonable. And then tier 2 would be kind of the next step of those projects that might be achievable, and quite frankly, what we used to figure out what that ask was, is that's about the ask of what once Amendment 3 bond proceeds get freed up in 2024, that if you redid that program again, that's about another $1.5 billion. So those are taking something that's probably undoable and trying to figure out what are the achievable things and tier these things up in a way that not only citizens can get their hands on and figure out what it is, but also something that's relatively maybe feasible to do in the not too distant future. Because one of the things I think we heard was when you start talking about $8 billion and, you know, these huge numbers, everybody knows that we're not going to get any kind of revenue increase that's going to be $8 billion, right? If history serves, that's a pretty high bar. So I think that's been the effort, is to try to figure out, let's see if we can do that. So these were the outcomes. You know, one of the things that I think became very clear is $350 million doesn't go very far, and another $2 billion really doesn't either. So, you know, after we went through the process, we said, here's tier 1, it was $600 million and another $2+ billion, and that's only a third of the unfunded need. So we still have, you know, that other red section to go. So one of the things that we want to try to do is also, as we looked at this, these were all regionally done, right? And very good work is done, but there are some things that you all in the regions don't really take into account, and not that you really should. But we've identified some things that probably need to be added to our unfunded needs list, and they're really kind of statewide things. You know, you take a look at the interstate stuff that happens in your region, but we're really kind of looking at the interstate as a system. There's some things that we need to really think about as from reliability, reconstruction, kind of the operating the system type stuff. Something that's really hit us hard this year is flood and flood resiliency. I think there's some issues that we probably need to think about dealing with on that front. And then multimodal. You know, we need to kind of put some specificity to the bucket of multimodal. Now that one's a huge one, and trying to figure out what is that reasonable, achievable thing that we could kind of expect is a little more difficult. So here's what we've kind of come up with, and we'd like maybe your input, because we know that, you know, a lot of the multimodal systems are locally funded. They're also usually locally owned. So there are other revenue that comes to play that really are kind of outside of the discussion that we're talking about. But, you know, kind of the idea would be is that maybe we try to put some specificity to something in the range of a target of tier 1 being 30 to 50 million and tier 2 being maybe up to 80. And you may ask, well, where do you come up with that number? because we could have that be billions, right? Well, the way we come up with that number is kind of the same way that we talked about it in roads and bridges. What is something that's feasible that could possibly happen? And kind of the idea that we're using is, and it really came out of the 21st Century Transportation Task Force that was convened in the legislature, but it was the idea that, well, maybe you could at some point talk about 1/10 of a cent sales tax for multimodal transportation. You know, that by no means is the thing that generates enough to do light rail expansion in St. Louis, or build a streetcar in Kansas City, or fund, you know, anything statewide of huge proportions. But it is something that probably would be a maybe achievable dedicated funding source. You know, I don't know if anybody else has any better ideas of where to start, but this is kind of where we thought would be a good place to start, because that is something that's been talked about. Still a huge bar, high bar to get that done. But I think at least if we start having the discussion and put in here kind of what would that do, at least then we can have a reasonable discussion with policymakers, legislators, the folks that are doing this, to start talking about that bucket in our unfunded needs. So this is kind of the discussion we want to have. You know, in transit, that could be the opportunity to match those federal funds in those programs that exist. You know, we want to know what those needs are. I think trying to say we're going to do a couple $1 billion light rail expansion probably is not what we're talking about here. It's really those things that are really can be achieved, I think. So we're going to ask you guys to tell us what that looks like as we add it to this discussion. And we'd like to do this in the kind of in the time frame of this legislative session, so that we can have that discussion with legislators. Maybe that's unreasonable, but we think the opportunity is there to use this entire package to have the discussion, maybe not in this legislative session, but to tee up the discussion for the next one, knowing this year is an election year. So, you know, in aviation, the Aviation Trust Fund pays for the basic maintenance of runways and taxiways, but the issues that come up that we hear about are hangars and terminals, right? Those are kind of expensive, but could it be a matching program? Maybe. I don't know. Something we'd like some feedback on. Really, in the railroad arena, the big issue is passenger rail and the state-supported system. A dedicated funding source for that would be a huge win, because we are at the place right now that the Amtrak line in Missouri, Amtrak is starting to charge us interest on the arrears, and we're not paying enough through the legislative process to keep Amtrak running. And so we're quickly going to approach the place where that one is probably going to be in jeopardy. So just an example, there probably are some others. Somebody asked me about, well, should we do more grade crossing stuff? We're really at the mercy of the railroads. And we've got plenty of money to do that. We just can't get, you know, things going with the railroads. So it's not like we need to have a rail crossing program that we fund because we've got the money. It's really more about generating the projects and getting the railroad to work with us. So on railroads, that's some ideas. The ports, you know, are probably a little better defined. The ports have gotten together and have a prioritized list. It's pretty big, but I think this is the opportunity to tier that list up and say, what are the top priorities, and here are the tier twos, and have that discussion about ports. So kind of and bicycle pedestrian, we want to really talk about that a little bit. I think the question here really becomes, you know, in the road and bridge plan, pedestrian and bike accommodations are part of that funding package, but there are things that probably don't ever rise to that level. So the question is, should it be in that arena of our STIP, or should it be in the arena of this potential future multimodal package. And right now there is no multimodal package, so it is in the STIP. But definitely there are needs there that we probably should talk about. So this is the process we want to put in place. We want to take that to the commission on a yearly basis to reconfirm that these are those unfunded needs. And I think the big benefit of this is it's kind of like that road and bridge program, the user-friendly version of that this will be that people can look at and can understand what they get if they do something, right? It's not a big old number in a bucket that says, hey, we're just going to improve the condition or we're going to do multimodal improvements. It actually targets real projects that people can see and understand in their regions and maybe get the momentum to do something. So what we'd like to do, and Eric's going to work with you all over the next couple of months to take what we've done and then add these pieces of the puzzle, some of the statewide stuff. We'll probably take the lead on most of that because that's where we have kind of the knowledge and expertise on the multimodal stuff. We really need your input on that because that's one of those, it's pretty regional. There's a few of them that are statewide issues, but most of them are pretty regional. And those practical things that we can do to get some kind of tiered unfunded needs list that people can grab a hold of in that arena, I think would be a real step forward. I know that one's hard to do because we looked at it and kicked it around a lot. So your feedback on that is going to be really helpful as we try to get something that we can all kind of coalesce around to use as our document to go talk to folks about increasing funding for transportation. Okay, so with that, any questions I can answer for you or something you want to tell us about what you think about that idea? It's great. You're going to all get right on it, and we'll have this done in weeks. Maybe not.
And I'll start. I feel like there's questions. So one of the questions I have is on the transit. On that slide, you said it has to be construction ready.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like this. You know, if we can't say it's construction ready, it's hard to have that as like a tier one project, right? That's the beauty of doing this is we say, hey, these things that are in tier one, they're going to be the next things that move in when we get money. Because the great benefit to this is going to be is when we get done with STIP development this year, we're going to take a bunch of... Did I do that?
Yeah.
Mike Henderson did that. But I think that's going to be the beauty to show the value of this is we're going to take projects off the work you guys did on the tier one list and we're going to put them in the STIP and build them. Now, construction ready, we put that up there just to kind of say, hey, this isn't the stuff that, you know, is 20 years off. This is the stuff that we feasibly could do to bring into that next STIP, right? It's kind of it's basically the on deck list, and I know the MPOs kind of do that already, right? You have a 7 to 12 year plan or something like that. Some of the RPCs do too. So, you know, that's a great starting point for that. Okay, so we're going to be asking for your help on that, and so wanted to kind of throw that one out there and tee it up so that we're ready to add that to our unfunded needs list, and we've already used this very successfully, and I think we will continue to do that. So, thank you.